Good evening, everyone. So this is our fourth class, so I hope everything's going well, that you're getting a lot of practice in, that you're getting a lot of good prayer time in with your scriptures, and that the Lord's really showing you some beautiful things with all of this. So last week we talked about some of the decorations and the decorative elements that we'll be doing in this. Today we're going to talk about the initial and versal letters. So those are the super fancy letters that you see in Illuminated Manuscript that make them, that one of the things that make them really beautiful and unique. Today is going to be a little bit of a shorter presentation. I want to give you guys more time to actually work on your pieces and work on practice. And a lot of the techniques that I talked about last week and in calligraphy are going to apply. They're going to the calligraphy piece and the decorative piece are going to smash together a little bit to create these beautiful illuminated letters. So we're going to get started. So initial and versal letters. So these are basically letters that either begin a verse or the initial part of a large section of the book. Usually the very beginning of the very beginning of the page or the beginning of a chapter. A lot of times you'll see them at the beginning of like if you have a section of the Gospels, it'll be at the very beginning of like Mark's Gospels. You have a giant beautiful M, that sort of thing. Versals start a verse. Initials start those bigger sections. So, and you can see in this this picture I chose for it, you have multiple sizes of these various different beautifully done letters that are all different sizes, different level of decoration, and it's all because they're starting, different sections of the text. So these things began back in the Roman times, and they began primarily because I don't know anyone else who has been reading a long document and then you lose your way and you're like, where am I? It's just so many words, I've lost my place, that sort of thing. These things are like landmarks. They started as just ways to have landmarks to be able to find your place more easily when you're reading through a text. So when I was talking about calligraphy several weeks ago, I had mentioned that there were very few standards for how you write things out. So especially in ancient times when writing was still kind of in its nascent years, they didn't have standardized punctuation, they didn't have standard ways of indicating new sections, anything like that. You look at some ancient Greek documents, for example, that are very old, and they don't have any way to distinguish between one sentence and another. Sometimes they don't even separate words. It's just letters going around in a circle spiraling in. And it's like, how do you even read that? So it just adds to that difficulty in reading. So these things developed as a way to help indicate where someone was in a page, where the different sections were. And then as time moved on and the manuscripts themselves got more beautiful, more elaborate, more decorative, artists just came in and do what artists do, and they started making these things really beautiful. So this is kind of how they developed over time. It wasn't any one particular person who said, I want to do this. It was just, this is something neat to do and I want to do it, and it'll help people kind of find their way and add illumination to the textual meaning. So these letters are built up in a way that calligraphy isn't. So a lot of times they will look like larger versions of the calligraphy letter, but they'll be made with multiple strokes, for example. So for example, if you're going to create a letter C, normally that's two strokes, right? We learned from calligraphy that you have one stroke for the main body and then a second stroke for that little top part to make it into that partial circle. Well, if you were going to do it as an initial or a versal, one way to do it would be, instead of doing two strokes, you would do four strokes. So two strokes for the main body to make it extra wide and to make it larger, and then two strokes for the top piece to make it extra wide and extra larger. And that's going to differentiate it from the other sections. And then you can add decorative pieces over top of it if you want. That's one way to create it. Another way that you can build it up is, and one of the handouts I handed out was, it actually has a section on built-up letters where you basically write your letter normally as you would, and then you add sections on the side. You draw little lines on the side to indicate the wider sections you want, and then you fill it in. That's another way that you can do it. Or you can even just straight out use a pencil and draw the outline of the shape. So that document I made with the sparrows on it, I didn't write the main S, the initial S. I didn't write it as I would a calligraphy S. I basically drew it out in boxes with a pencil and said, this is the shape it's going to be. This is the way I want it to look. So those are two different ways that you can, or three different ways that you can start building the shape of your initial letter, and your versals if you want to add in other decorative letters in your text. So these are going to be different types and styles that you can make, and you can choose whichever combination or whichever one you want to do, or if you want to do something different, you're more than welcome to do different things. So puzzle letters, these are exactly what they sound like. They're essentially letters that look like they're two puzzle pieces that are fit together. And they basically build up these letters, and then they draw a line through the center in some decorative way, and oftentimes they would do one side blue and one side red. And then in the middle between the two colors, they would do a white line. And so it's a really simple way to make a really beautiful decorative letter that is actually quite simple, and especially if you want to use a limited ink. You have like limited choices in ink. So these were very common. I saw a lot of them in the 1400s when I was looking through my research. I saw a lot of them coming up in the 1400s and the 1300s is when these really started popping up. I added in this one with the gold, even though most of them were done in red and blue. This one also has included gold, so that's just one way to make it a little extra fancier, is if you add in that gold and you sub it out instead of the red or the blue to just make it shine a little bit more. So this is one style of letter, and if you're a little bit hesitant about doing the really elaborate styles, this is a really simple way to kind of get your feet wet and making these letters really special and really fancy in a way that the other calligraphy, the rest of the calligraphy won't be. So this is like a herringbone, fishbone design. This is the one that I've done primarily in most of the demonstrations I've done, because it is another very simple way to make your letters. You basically do a solid color on your letter, and then you use white ink to go over the top of that ink, and to go over the top of that base color, and then you just add in little lines to make a design within the letter. So it's kind of got the name herringbone, fishbone, because it looks like literally fishbones. Fishbones are actually quite beautiful if you look at them and you look at the delicacy of them and the intricacy of them. Like, as a design, the Lord does amazing things with his creations. So this is one way to add in that added intricacy and touch to something to make it look a little bit extra fancy, a little bit extra special, in a way that the rest of the calligraphy doesn't. Oftentimes when I've seen examples of this, most of the time it's been a blue letter with white decoration over top. But you don't have to hold to that. You could do a red letter with white, or you could do a red with black, or you could do any combination that you would want to try. This middle one is actually kind of a combination of the puzzle letter and the herringbone style. It has blue on one side of the letter and red on the other side of the letter. So they kind of mishmash the styles, and that's actually the case for many of these examples that we'll be looking at, is that it's hard to delineate this is this style and that style. They cross over many times, and it all depends on what the artist wants to do with his text. So this is the knotwork. This was especially seen in those earlier years of Illuminated Manuscript and the insular design, and then also in like the during Charlemagne, that Carolingian design and style. So they had a lot of this knotwork that they would add in. And this knotwork, a lot of times they would include animals, they would include people, they would have like the terminals of the knot, sometimes the ropes, if for lack of a better term, that make up the knot, they would come to an end, and then at the end there they would add a flower or the head of an animal or the feet of an animal, so then the whole knot becomes part of the animal. And that's just one way to add in that extra little design element, decoration element, to make it a little bit fancier. But you can also be as simple as like the eye that I have here all the way on the left-hand side, where it's just a plain blue eye, and then they drew a simple curvy kind of the beginning of a knotwork on either side. And it's still beautiful, and it still does a great job of making it look a little bit fancier to make it stand out and help people kind of find their spot. So that's one really beautiful way to do it. You can use the knotwork to make up the letter itself, like in this middle example with the two guys helping each other climb this ladder. Or you can just put the knotwork right in the middle of the letter, like in the giant B example. They have several different designs and patterns within there to just add to the decoration of the letter. They could. It would depend on if it was the same artist. And oftentimes, in all honesty, it wouldn't be the same artist. So a lot of times if you look at different manuscripts, you can tell, you can tell definitively that these are different artists working on different sections because the styles are so very different. Oftentimes you can see when it is the same artist because they will do similar things. But even then, they'll change it up depending on how much space they have. If they want to do something different, a different element like the eye, they might do a little bit of a different knotwork depending on what they're going to be including in there. So, and over time, I mean, these books were created over over decades. So over that time, you might have a score of people working on it. And also your own personal style might change. So in the beginning, your knotwork might not be all that good. And then by the end, you're very good at it because you've been practicing it for the past 10 years. So over that time period, you're not going to be doing kind of simple knots. You're going to get more and more elaborate as you go. So you would see some similarities, but it's not unusual to see a lot of differentiation over the course of a work. So these are inhabited initials. These are starting to get a little bit more fancy in the sense that you're adding in animals or people. So, and this is still at the decorative level. I like this middle one because you're starting to get more fancy, but when you look at this middle S, it's literally just two circles that they overlapped, and then they used that same circle shape that they were tracing probably to just make fish. And it's so simple, but it's so effective, and fish is such a beautiful symbol. So even having something as simple as that, you can still bring in a lot of symbolism to bring into your meditation and your contemplation for what you're reading and what you're going to be doing. So the inhabited initial, even though you're bringing in animals and people, oftentimes this was just for decorative purposes. There wasn't necessarily going to be a connection between the text itself and what you're actually drawing in the initial. It's just to make it fancy and pretty and interesting. So, and you can make it, like I said, as simple or as complicated you want. The C all the way on the left, that's a really complicated one where you're bringing in some knotwork into it, but you also have that person and the animal that's there. Or you can make it as simple as the one with the fishes, and it's literally just circles. So this is the historiated initial, and this is probably the most complicated one you can do. And this is when you start bringing in, for example, those miniature pictures that we were talking about, where you're actually showing people and scenes that relate to the text itself and what's going on in the text. For example, this middle B, that's a beautiful miniature picture of Saint Joseph having the dream that convinces him to take Mary into his home. And that right there, you can look at that B, and that basically tells you the whole story of the text, all in that little picture. So these are where you can get really, really beautiful and in-depth with your imagery, with your symbolism, and bringing all of that in to tie into what was going on in the text. So people would do these oftentimes because it helps when someone who is illiterate picks up the Bible or picks up the book that's going to be read, then they don't have to necessarily be able to read to know what the text is saying to them. I can't read, I don't know what this middle one is written in. I can't read that language, but I can still know what the text is about because I know that story and I know those scriptures. So I can still understand what's going on in the passage, even though I can't actually read it. So, and as you can see, there are still design elements that are carrying over from the other styles that we looked at. The C on the right-hand side, that's basically a puzzle initial, only it's a really simple one. They just drew their letter and then they drew a line through it and did one side red and one side blue. And they added on that herringbone kind of design, throwing the white ink over top to make it an extra pretty design. But they still have that indication of what's going on in the text with the monks that are looking at and singing those hymns. So these are really beautiful ways to really tie in more of your decoration and more of your symbolism and giving yourself that food for really meditation and contemplation of what you're going to be reading, what you're going to be, what's going on in your own heart and what the Lord is speaking to you in your own heart about these things. So these are 3 common formatting structures. I thought this would be helpful for everybody to kind of look at, and how do I actually incorporate this thing into the text? Because initial letters and versal letters are much bigger. So when you're doing something that much bigger, you have to consider what is that going to do to the structure of my text and the body of my text and how it's going to be. So these are 3 basic approaches that you can kind of take to figure out, okay, how do I want to embed this thing into my text itself? So one is that it's on the same waistline, and it's on the same baseline, and it's just towering above all the other words. So if you're going to do that, then you just have to keep in mind that you're going to have that empty space to fill in if you want to fill it in and have additional decoration. That would be one way that they would use that, would be if they're going to have a miniature picture to show the scene that's going on right above it. That would be one thing that they could do. If I was going to do this with the Sparrow manuscript that I did, I could put instead of putting the pelican at the bottom, I could put him on the top, and then that would fill in that space to kind of give that decorative element. So another way to do it is to set it in that left margin area, and then you have all the text lined up right next to it. So it's kind of sitting outside of the text. And oftentimes you'll see this when you have the initial letters, where it's like the initial letter design goes way down. It goes down in a really, really straight line. Like, for example, when we go up this B, that's up here, it has that line that goes down straight down the center or off to the side. And that's one way that you can handle how to fill in that area, is you just fill in a beautiful design flowing out from the letter itself. And I think in the side here you can see on the P, it's the same thing, where they just extend the letter down to really make it huge. So another way that you can approach it is you can have a drop cap. So that's basically where you're setting it on a certain line. You're picking a baseline to put it on, but then you're doing a border around it. So you're giving it a structure to kind of live in, and then you fill in that structured area with design work. So you can make the design work as simple as you want or as elaborate as you want, but basically the text kind of floats around the letter itself. So these are all just ideas. As I said, this is something that you can be very creative in and how you want to do it. Some manuscripts didn't even bother putting an initial letter in there. What they would do is they would put a little miniature picture for what was going to be in the text, and then they just assumed you knew what the first letter of the word was. So it would be like if you're going to write the and you don't bother putting in the T, because you just assume they know the first word is the, therefore I don't need to put the T in there. Which, as I said, in the Middle Ages, or at least in the beginning of the Renaissance and into the Enlightenment era, there was a major problem that people were trying to fix with the non-standardization of how do you write things down. So with the advent of the printing press, that was something they were really grappling with. We need to get these things standardized spellings, standardized punctuation, all of those rules set so that everybody's on the same page. And I meant that joke. So literally, but yeah. So you can get creative with this if you want. Just be aware, if you get too fancy, it might make it difficult to read what it actually says. So you still kind of have to work in that area. I mean, if it's just going to be a document for yourself that you can enjoy and you can pray with, then do whatever you want. Like, you're gonna be the one reading it. But if you're giving it to someone else and you make it completely unreadable what that first letter is, it might get a little confusing. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're starting to design your letters and everything. My mom she's a longer working art teacher than me. She's been doing it for much longer. She donated she let me use this lovely book of all these different alphabets. So it's over here on the table if you want to take a look, get some ideas for designs and things. She also had a great idea, so I'm stealing all of her. She gave me this idea. If you want a square to actually draw out where your text is going to be, or like have a nice good square line to be able to use and fill in your structures a little bit, she brought some of these oh gosh, what are they called? Matting. Yeah, she brought in some matting for everybody to use, so you can draw out and trace that. So She also very kindly offered if you have a question and I'm busy with somebody else, you can go over to her and ask her the question. Sorry if I'm calling you out. so so yeah, so there's two of us if you want to tag team us. So that's going to be the end of the presentation tonight, because I want to be able to give you guys maximum time to be able to practice, work on it, get some designs and ideas flowing, and work on your manuscripts, because we only have 2 classes left, which is kind of sad. But yeah, if you guys can finish your manuscripts, that would be beautiful. If you can't, that's okay too. You'll have a good start. Next week will be the same thing. Will be a little bit of a shorter lesson and more time to work. So since we're going to have a longer work session, I'm going to ask that you can talk, but kind of keep the talking a little bit quieter so people can really focus. And if they want to pray while they're doing it, they can have the opportunity to pray as well and kind of talk to the Lord as they're doing it. So you can talk, but don't get super loud. Otherwise, we'll set up a super loud table in the corner. You'll get banished to the other side of the room. No, I'm just kidding. We won't do that. Yeah. Yeah, I'll be walking around. If anybody has any questions, please feel free. Oh yeah, and I also, in case you wanted to have some leaves to be able to kind of look at and say, what kind of leaf do I want to do? Because we talked about that leafy border last week. My mom also brought in some pressed leaves, and so she's looking out for all of you guys. So. Oh yeah, and there's some. There are also. Oh, I don't remember your name. I'm sorry. Meg. Meg brought in some books with actual Christian symbols. Last week I was complaining that I couldn't find any books with any of that in there. She has some, which I'm going to find out the names and the publishers and write those down. So, and they're going to be up here on the tables for you guys to look at as well, to see if there are any extra symbols you want to bring into your manuscripts. And so, okay, so good, happy drawing.